One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about episode 3 of the HBO series Winning Time, entitled The Best Is Yet to Come. I think this title is actually kind of appropriate because even though I am still immensely enjoying this show, you've got really creative and inspired visuals. You have great performances by all of the players involved. John C. Reilly in particular is doing an incredible job. The show is funny. The show is fresh. The show is creative. The show is fun. Despite all of these things, though, it is moving at a snail's pace. Like, if you think about episode 1, we started off with the Lakers deciding whether or not they want to draft Magic and Jerry Buss trying to buy the team. We're now at the end of episode 3, and we haven't even gotten to the preseason yet. Magic just arrived in LA. At this pace, we're not even going to be through the All-Star break by the All-Star break of year 1 by the end of this season. And it makes me wonder, I assume this show is going to be a one-season limited series, and that these however many episodes, 8, 10 episodes, we're going to cover the entirety of the Showtime Lakers run from the very beginning up until Magic's HIV diagnosis, the Pistons smacking them around in '89, all that good stuff, right? But that can't happen unless the pacing is going to wildly shift in the back half of this season, or if we're going to just skip a lot of stuff that we don't necessarily need to see. Like, we're not going to sit here and cover every single game. So I think it's going to mainly cover, how the team became kind of like just a symbol for the city. And I think that like they can kind of cover that in bits and pieces, I think. But I'm really surprised that we have spent 3 full hours with this show and we have not even gotten into the preseason yet, let alone the regular season, let alone the decade-plus run that this team goes on. And again, look at the end of episode 2. Episode 2 ended with the cliffhanger of Jerry West, the coach, surprisingly quitting. We end episode 3, they still don't have a coach yet. So, this show is really taking its time. But fortunately, because of the great performances and because of the creativity and because of the fun, it's still a very easy watch, and it's been really enjoyable to get through. So I actually want to start with this whole coaching thing, because that's kind of like the A plot of this episode, is spending time getting to know the potential coaching candidates. You have obviously Jerry West, who just dropped out as coach, but they start to kind of do some things with Jerry West that I think I'm starting to find a little interesting as well. And then you have Jerry Tarkanian, the coach of UNLV, who ends up being considered for the job as well. And then you also have Pat Riley, who is not considered for the job, but is still prominently featured in this episode. And then in a way, you also have Jack McKinney, who I'll talk about Jack McKinney briefly, but I think the end of the next episode will probably be the best time to talk about Jack McKinney, but we'll see. So starting off with Jerry West and Jerry Buss, they start off this episode right where we left off at the last one. Buss is chewing him out, it's vicious, over blindsiding him with the whole I'm quitting as coach, and blindsiding him in front of everyone else, which is valid. He says they're a couple of weeks from training camp or something to that effect, and he's really leaving him in a bad spot, quitting like this. And throughout the episode, when we do see Jerry West, we see him kind of, I think, coming to the realization that he may not be able to successfully coach the team. And he says, he says to Buss, if I could suit up and play for you, I would. That's how much I love this team. That's how much I want him to win. But he can't. He just feels that he cannot coach. He will not be good at it. I like how even during this argument, Jerry Buss makes the same assertion that Sharman did in the last episode. The idea that if you got everything that you wanted, all the players that you needed, and you still failed, you wouldn't have any more excuses. And Buss makes that same point, which I thought was a pretty good point. But throughout the episode, I think Jerry West comes to the realization that I may not be able to coach. I can't bring this team to where Buss wants it to be, to where I want it to be, to where the city wants it to be. But I think he comes to the realization that he can assess other people's ability to do that. And I think that's a good transition into where Jerry West eventually ends up, which is GM. But he's packing up his stuff. Jack McKinney comes in, an assistant from Portland, and it's basically just kind of like asking him, like, seems like a pretty cushy gig. Why are you leaving? Why did you make the decisions that you made? And why'd you do this instead of that? Like, kind of, just questions him. And Wes is like, who is this fucking guy? Like, he's nobody. He's an assistant. He's a number 2 guy, and that's just his arrogance. But as the episode progresses, and he has a conversation and other things with his wife, I think he comes to the realization that McKinney might actually be good for the job. And he comes up toward the end of the episode, walks up to Bus, and is basically like, yo, I got your replacement. I think it should be McKinney. And Bus is like, I already got Tarkanian, but thank you, appreciate it. Don't let the doorknob hit you on the way out. And even though we didn't spend too much time with West, I like the idea of him coming to grips with his inability to coach, but seemingly just they're dipping their toe in the GM idea. Like, I may not be able to coach, but I know I can properly assess who can. And I think that's they just gave us a little bit of that, but I think that was pretty well done. Moving on to Jerry Tarkanian, we see him with this guy named Vic Weiss. It's spelled like Weiss, but I'm pretty sure they pronounced it Weiss in the episode. But even then, it's like his license plate says something like Wise Guy, but it was spelled Weiss. So maybe it is just Weiss, because the Weiss Guy doesn't work, but it's spelled like Weiss Guy. Like, it makes sense. But however the fuck you pronounce this guy's name, I'll call him Weiss, Vic Weiss. We start off when we're introduced to Tarkanian and Weiss. We find out that Tarkanian is in trouble, or at least under the microscope of the NCAA for being having some shady recruiting practices, bribing guys and whatnot. And as the episode progresses, I think we're meant to take from it that the money that Tarkanian was using to bribe players to come to UNLV was money that was supplied by the mob. There's an interesting conversation between Tarkanian and Weiss, where he's kind of like, Weiss is convincing him to take the Lakers job. Like, yo, you got to do this. This is a big deal. And Tarkanian's like, yo, I like it here. Like, why would I do that? And he's like, how much you on the hook for? Kind of implying that you want me to take this job because you need the money. And Weiss is like, no, I'm good. And Tarkanian's like, well, all right, if you good, so am I. And like, that was kind of his opportunity, if you're Weiss, to admit, like, yeah, I am kind of, in debt to the mob for X amount of dollars or whatever the case may be. And he didn't take that opportunity, and he said he was good, and Tarkanian said he was good, and that was it. Until Bus decides that he wants to meet with them, and they go have dinner at this restaurant. Everything seems to be going fairly well. Bus offers him $750,000 a year in 1979 to coach the Lakers. And Weiss, being greedy, also asked for a car. And Bus, being just someone who is willing to at least seem as if he has an abundance of money to spend, says, hey, why don't you take 2? And it seems kind of like they have a deal, but then they're brought some champagne, and we see it's from the mob. And I think we are meant to interpret from that the mob was watching this meeting and essentially going, yeah, just so you don't forget, we work together. It's me and it's us. You can't go to LA and coach there. You work for us here in Vegas. And they scoot out real quick, Weiss and Tarkanian. They dip. And I think, well, before I get to how this ends, I also like the fact that just on the face of it, Bus offering $750,000 a year and 2 Rolls Royces to Jerry Tarkanian to coach the Lakers is already ridiculous. But earlier in the episode, we see that his mother found out, and this was incredibly interesting to me, that Jack Cook, who we saw in the first episode, there's a lot of motherfuckers named Jack affiliated with the Lakers, right down to Jack Nicholson. Anyway, we find out that Cook bought the Forum on credit. Like, he got a loan with a balloon payment. And what a balloon payment is, essentially, you might have like a mortgage that amortizes, something like that. I can't recall how to pronounce this word for some reason. I can spell it, but I'm pretty sure that's it. And you just like any other mortgage, you might pay X amount of dollars per month for the duration of that term. We'll say 30 years. But the way this works with them is like you don't pay that much, and then you pay a big balloon payment at the end. And a balloon payment is just like one big massive one that essentially pays out the rest of the loan. So like, say if you got, there's no need to hypothesize. he has a $3 million balloon payment that's due in 2 months that Cook failed to mention. Of course, why would he, when he sold the team? So Bus is now in a position where he owes $3 million to Great Western Bank. And I think we can kind of figure out. Actually, I'm not going to say we can figure out. I'm going to explain it. He owes $3 million to Great Western Bank in 2 months to pay for the arena. So for him to offer $750,000 a year, it's like, he doesn't have this shit, but he's just saying what he has to say to get what he needs. The forum is eventually called the Great Western Forum. I don't know if that was like the start of essentially saying like, hey, you can be like, maybe it plays out like, hey, we owe you $3 million, but instead of paying you the $3 million, we give you naming rights to the arena, and now we'll call it the Great Western Forum, and now we're square. Like, I wonder if that's how it played out, or if it's a thing where like, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of got to be how it played out, honestly. But I wonder if that was the start of it, though. How these corporations started to get their names on arenas. Like, it wasn't very common back then. Like, Boston Garden was Boston Garden. Madison Square Garden. Like they had their names. Even here in Michigan, the Pistons played at the Palace of Auburn Hills. They played at Cobo Hall. They played at Pontiac Silverdome. It wasn't like Tropical Smoothie, fucking Starbucks Arena, or some shit like that. So, the forum being called the Great Western Forum is probably I don't know if that was the start of it or if it was always called that, but that when they said it was Great Western Bank, I was like, oh, okay. Interesting. So anyway, moving on from that, fast forwarding to the end of the episode, it sounds like Tarkanian has taken the job or agreed to take the job. After Jerry West comes in and says, "Hey, I think McKinney's great for this." Bus says, "Nope, we got Tarkanian, but thanks for your service." And then we see Tarkanian and his wife presumably driving to LA, and she's like circling houses in the paper, like, we're gonna buy this crib in Beverly Hills, all this good shit. And then it turns out that Weiss has been killed, and he's stuffed in the back of his trunk with Bus's card in his collar. And I think we are, again, meant to take from that, Tarkanian takes the job, he's leaving, the mobsters already essentially said via champagne bottle, you stay in here. They decide to leave, they took Weiss off the table. So I think ultimately that's how Jerry Tarkanian, spoiler alert, never ends up coaching the Lakers. And I think that was a really fun kind of, I can't say fun because I looked it up, and that, like, apparently Weiss really was killed, and it is presumed by the mob. But I think that I like how they, I think, took real life events and added a little bit of flair to it to make it narratively interesting in this episode, and it worked for me. I thought the Tarkanian stuff was really good. I thought the Weiss thing and the whole, like, they weren't really overt with it. They weren't saying like, look, gambling problems or money owed to the mob. Like, they were slick with it. They were subtle with it, and I like that. If you're a long time viewer of this channel, I don't like being treated like I'm a stupid viewer. I like for a show to assume I can put two and two together, and they did that with this whole situation with Tarkanian and the mob and all that. So that was pretty cool. And then Pat Riley. Pat Riley arrives at the forum. He can't get in. No former players allowed. He played for the Lakers. It's not just like no former players, like no former NBA players. He literally was a former Laker. Couldn't get in. And I'm sitting here thinking like, okay, Pat Riley's showing up to interview for the coaching position. I know he doesn't get it, but I can't say I know he doesn't get it. I know that he does not become the coach that the Lakers enter this season with. Spoiler alert, we haven't even met the coach that the Lakers spend most of this season with. But he can't get in the forum. We find out that he's actually wanting to audition to be the color commentator along with Chick Hearn. And that was surprising. I didn't know that Pat Riley ever even wanted to be the color commentator. And I looked it up, and he actually was a color commentator for a little bit. But he tries to make an audition tape, and he feels like he sucks at it. And he has a little bit of a fit. And earlier in the episode, we saw him walk in on his wife, who is a therapist, in the middle of a session, which he has in their house, I should say. And after that disruption, she later meets with Pat and is like, maybe you can cut down some of these vines that are coming in through here, clean it up in here, and I can have my therapy sessions in here, and you don't have to worry about coming in the house and interrupting me and whatnot. So fast forward to him supposedly bombing his audition tape. After he essentially gives up on that, he goes to, I guess, take out the vines. And I guess he's going to essentially, I'm assuming we are meant to take that this is him giving up. Like, he's just going to like let his wife have the garage and fuck it. I can't do this. I can't make this audition tape. I can't be a color commentator. And he goes to cut all this shit down, and he struggles with it. He grabs a chainsaw. He accidentally cuts part of his leg. I wonder if that's true. And then, he starts cutting through these branches that are going into the garage roof. Then he cuts through the garage roof. And then, like, we see, like, this montage of him just kind of, like, going nuts. And then it ends with him sitting in, like, this, like, pile of rubble that used to be his garage. And I'm thinking, like, wow, what a weird dream sequence this was. And then his wife comes out and is just like, yeah, I guess we can get a new garage. She didn't seem to give a shit. And I'm like, wait, this was real? Like, this wasn't a dream sequence? Like, that was such a weird scene to me. And I have a lot of trouble thinking that Pat Riley failed at making an audition tape, so he destroyed his garage. Like, I hope that that's meant to showcase his passion, rather than just showing like, yeah, this would be a cool thing to have in here. Like, I kind of hope he didn't do that, and they just like took some liberties with maybe however his failure at being a color commentator might have went. Or maybe, okay, I'm not even going to assume it's a failure. Maybe he just decided this isn't for me. But however that ended up, I'm assuming it didn't end as dramatically as destroying his whole garage. They added that on for some flair. And then later in the show, we're going to see Pat Riley being passionate, being the Pat Riley that we know. And we can look at it as like, yeah, we know this guy. This is the guy that tore down his fucking garage when he couldn't make an audition tape. So I thought that was an interesting decision. I still don't know how I feel about that scene, but it does give us an idea of Pat Riley. As far as Jack McKinney goes, like I said, I'm going to talk about Jack McKinney, I think, a little bit more at the end of the next episode, because I'm going to assume that and this could be an incorrect assumption considering how this show has been paced so far, but I'm going to assume that most of the Jack McKinney storyline is going to play out in the next episode. So I'll save it for then. And if they don't, or they don't play it all out, I'll talk about that as well. But I want to end with a little bit about Magic, because Magic was the B plot this week. And then I'll give a couple of thoughts. So Magic arrives in L.A. He seems to bond with Norm Nixon. They, get him some nice clothes. He's going to a movie premiere that a bunch of players are in. The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh, real movie, by the way. They go to this premiere. Norm is supposed to be in the movie. Bill Cosby arrives at this premiere. Magic's completely losing it because, again, this is just a guy from Lansing, and now he's in Hollywood with NBA players and Bill Cosby and whatnot. And he gets approached by this pimp named, did I write down his name? Yeah, Zastro. And Zastro gives him this card. Well, I'm not saying he's a pimp. I don't know. He looked like a pimp, but he gives Magic this card. Magic dips from the movie, and we see him look at the card. And I again, assumed that, okay, he must be going to wherever Zastro is at. And then they cut to what looks to be later that same night, or possibly early that morning, because what I failed to factor in is the 3-hour time difference. So Magic could have hung out all night, say till 3-4 o'clock in the morning LA time. He calls up his mom or his family. It's 4 o'clock for him. He just got home, but it's 7 a.m. for them. So now when he talks to them, he can reference last night. Like, I went to a movie premiere last night, because for them it's last night, but for him, he probably just got home, because as we could see during his conversation with his family, he went at Zastro's fucking everything that walks. So I assumed that he left the movie premiere, went to Zastro's, was up in there just getting his dick wet for like 3 hours, however long, and then he comes back home, and it's the next day or early morning for his family, so he decides he's going to call them up. And this scene is like this, where they cut back and forth between the phone conversation and the sex that he was having at Zastro's place. It was full of like weird, not weird, but like corny kind of puns. Like his mom said something like, "I hope you eating out there," and then it like cuts to him going down on some woman. And I think that, we also have to think about the fact that what we know now wasn't exactly, how far am I into this? 20 minutes, good. What we know now wasn't exactly common knowledge in 1979. I'm thinking, okay, Zastro is a pimp. These are probably all prostitutes, and Magic is giving him head, raw dog, and like doing all this. And as soon as he touches down in LA, and I think again, this is the show setting the stage for where we're gonna end up with his HIV diagnosis. And it's not very subtle, but yeah, I think to see someone having that kind of I don't want to call it intimate, but like, because it wasn't really intimate. But it wasn't just like, hey, I'm going to throw on a condom and I'm going to bang everybody that's here. It was like, okay, you doing a lot on some prostitutes, bro. Like nobody, no, not nobody, but a lot of people will be wary about doing something like that now, because we have the knowledge that we have of just how dangerous that can be for someone sexually to be doing that kind of stuff with just any old body. So to see Magic doing that, like Magic probably wasn't thinking nothing of it at that time. And we know how it ended up. And then now, largely because of how that ended up for him, I think that brought a lot of that sexual knowledge into the forefront. And people started learning and talking about how you can get HIV. How did Magic get it? It's not just a disease that a gay man can get. Like, and I think a lot of like Magic's diagnosis helped bring a lot of that information to the forefront. But it was still kind of shocking, even though I wasn't around in 1979, but I'm aware of what Magic was getting into during the Showtime era. And even though I'm aware of it, to see him doing that kind of stuff with prostitutes or hookers, what's the same thing? To see him doing that kind of stuff is just like, man, you have no idea. But literally, he didn't have any idea. Like, we do that kind of thing now. We know, like, okay, I'm risking some shit doing some stuff like this. But yeah, they really set the stage for what is going to be Magic's eventual HIV diagnosis. So with 22 minutes left, I just have a couple thoughts. I don't know if their portrayal of Chick Hearn is accurate, but man, the dude was wild problematic. I really wonder if the way he characterized Pat Riley in this episode, which I will not repeat on camera, to live on the internet forever, me saying those kind of words. I don't know if he really characterized Pat Riley in that way, but I'm still curious if he even talked about people in that way. Because I don't look at Chick Hearn as that kind of dude. I just look at him as like, oh, he's the fucking announcer, man. He's probably clean cut kind of guy. Like, to hear him say stuff like that, I'm like, whoa, do you really talk like that? And then this doesn't necessarily relate to this episode, but I was listening to a podcast where they talked about this, and it wasn't the official podcast, it was another one. But they mentioned that, no, it was an interview with one of the people who's one of the showrunners. Not Hecht, not Barnes, who's one of the writers. I can't remember the first guy. I can't remember his name, but it was an interview with him. And he talked about how, how I was saying that the visuals are really creative and they make you feel like you're in 1979. These are not filters or tricks that were used in editing. He said they actually dug up these real cameras from like these old prehistoric fucking cameras from the 80s and were actually using these to film. And he was saying like it's crazy because like when you're looking at what you're filming, it looks like that. Like they don't have to like do a bunch of editing techniques or anything to make it to age the way it looks. When you film with that camera, it just looks like that. And they said that was all really cool. And I thought that was really cool, the idea of them doing that. So finding these old cameras and using it for that authenticity. And of course, that's going to save you a lot of time in post as well. So pretty cool. Anyway, still enjoying the show. I do think the pacing needs to pick up a little bit. But even with the pace that it's moving, it's still wildly interesting, intriguing, and fun to watch. I love watching this show. I look forward to it every Monday morning. And yeah, I will see you guys for next week for episode 4. Peace.